Nice, that thing rides good.
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. If you're a first-time viewer, my name is Jeff Lanoski. Today is a super exciting day because I want to talk to you about this bike right here, my brand newish Reeb SST. I have a really cool story behind the inspiration for this color. I want to talk to you about the components that I choose for this bike, and I want to talk to you about how I set it up. So let's dive into it. If you're a fan of the channel or Reeb Cycles, you've probably heard of the SST. Pinkbike just did a great review on this bike, so I'll leave a link to that article in the description below. The first time I got to ride the prototype of this bike was in April. I took it on a cross-country road trip from California to New Jersey, and I hit some really fun trails along the way. That's when I first fell in love with this bike. SST stands for Steel Short Travel, and this has 120 millimeters of rear wheel travel. The name alone probably brings up the first question: why steel for a suspension bike? I first started mountain biking on a steel hardtail. When I joined Reeb 4 years ago, I got back on a steel hardtail and I fell in love with the ride quality of that material and the nice resilient feel. But up until recently, a steel suspension bike might not have been possible because a lot of the pivot points and different components would need to be solid, which would make a really heavy frame. Recently, additive manufacturing, also known as 3D printing, has gotten really popular, and that's one of the technologies that helps make this frame possible. So when you look closely at this bike, the chainstay yoke, the seat stay clevises, main pivot point, and the rear dropouts are all 3D printed. It allows us to make these parts hollow, which allows them to be strong and lightweight. Another cool feature is being able to laser miter a lot of these tubes. When we build our frames in-house in Lyons, Colorado, everything goes together and it's a perfectly tight fit that allows us to weld a nice high tolerance frame. Another thing that allows us to keep the weight down is using a flex stay. So the chain stay is actually flattened. That gives us a flex area. You don't need to have extra pivots and bolts, and that allows us to make the frame a little bit lighter and stiffer as well. Looking at this frame is like looking at a piece of artwork. Before I talk to you about how this bike rides out on the trail, let's talk to you really quick about the component choices for this bike. I'm a professional mountain bike rider. I've been doing that for over 25 years. A lot of the parts, or basically all of them, are sponsor provided, but all of my sponsors make lots of different components. So even though I'm contractually obligated to run a certain brand, they make all different kinds of parts. So I'm going to talk to you about why I choose the ones that I do. Starting with the grips, I run Ergon GE1 grips. They make lots of different ones. The GE1 is my favorite. It has a slight ergonomic shape and it has a really cool rubber compound. So for the longer days in the saddle, they're just nice and comfortable. For brakes, I'm running Shimano XTR. No secret there, XTR is their top of the line brake set. They're mated to a 203 rotor in the front and 180 millimeter rotor in the rear. That just gives me maximum stopping power on this bike. I'm running Pro Tharsis carbon handlebars, 30 millimeter rise, and those are attached to a 32 millimeter long I9 stem. My dropper post is controlled by a Shimano dropper lever. The rear derailleur is a Shimano XTR, and the cassette is an 1151. The front chain rings are 32 tooth, and then the cranks are 170 millimeter XTR cranks, and I use XTR trail pedals. Believe it or not, I go back and forth between flats and clips. I get a lot of comments because I do like riding clipped in, but I'll throw on flats every now and then. Right now it's set up for clips. For my saddle, I use an Ergon SME saddle. This is the Enduro saddle. It's black, it just matches the bike, and it looks really cool. The suspension is a DVO diamond in the front. Now with the diamond, I added about 15 cc's of oil to this fork to make it really progressive, and it gives it a great feel. I really like the small bump compliance at the bottom, but it does ramp up. On a shorter travel bike, I want a nice progressive travel feel. For the rear shock, I'm using a DVO Topaz. Similar to the front fork, I added a bunch of volume spacers in there to make it more progressive. On a shorter travel, I like it to be as progressive as possible. Jumping into wheels, for a shorter travel bike like this, I figure the terrain isn't going to be super rocky and rowdy. So I like the Vittoria Agaro tire. It has a smaller tread design. It rolls really fast, and when you're riding on slick rocks, it has great traction. Inside the tires, I use Orange Seal. That keeps me flat free. And then those are mounted to these really cool Industry 9 Enduro 305 wheels. When I talked to the guys about the inspiration for this bike and the color that I wanted it to be, they offered to do these bead blasted gold wheels. So unlike a lot of the Industry 9 wheels that you see, instead of these being shiny gold, these are a nice matte gold and they look super, super cool. That's a quick rundown of the components. Before I talk to you about the inspiration for the color and paint job on this bike, let me talk to you a little bit about how it rides. Now, if you're a fan of the channel, you probably know that I love hardtails. So looking down at the front of this bike, I feel like I'm on my hardtail. But I also love riding my squeeb. The 130 millimeters or 150 millimeters of travel on the rear end could really bail you out in some tricky situations. So with the SST, I feel like it's the best of both worlds. One of the things that I do to make this bike a little bit more capable is over fork the front end. So this bike has a 65.5-degree head angle with a 140 millimeter travel fork. I put on 150 millimeter. It brings that head tube angle down to 65 and allows me to just get a little bit rowdier on those downhills. The other thing that amazed me was how well it climbed on some of the technical slick rock all over Moab. Having 120 millimeters of travel on the rear end just allows it to be a little bit snappier, but it still feels really planted and allows you to have really good traction when you're climbing on this bike. That's one of the things that the guys from Pinkbike commented as well. It's climbing prowess. It climbs really, really well. Nice, that thing rides good. If you're a fan of the channel, you know that I really love technical riding, and I just went to Richmond, Virginia and did an event called the Techie Scavenger Hunt. I was considering bringing my hardtail. I brought the SST and it was a perfect choice because at this event, we had some drop-ins and steeper roll downs and stuff like that. But for all the technical moves, the climbs and the ups and the riding over picnic tables and logs and stuff like that, it was really awesome and very agile too. The last video I made was from New York City, and that just goes to show the versatility of this bike. I took it to Moab and it handled all that stuff like a champ, but it also was super fun to ride around New York City. Very agile, great for bunny hopping and doing all kinds of technical maneuvers. So my overall impression of the SST, you're gonna be seeing this bike in a lot of my videos. All right, so now for the inspiration behind the bike. If you follow my channel, you probably saw this tattoo start popping up in March. This is a tattoo of an airplane that my grandfather gave me when I was a kid. My grandfather was a certified welder and not an artist by any means, but he went through this phase when I was a kid where he made his kids and his grandkids a bunch of different art sculptures, and I ended up with this airplane. The airplane was painted gold with a bunch of different silver solder, so that's why this bike has silver highlights as well. My grandfather was a huge inspiration in my life. He's probably the hardest worker that I've ever met. He's the reason why I love building and tinkering as my main hobby when I'm not riding bikes. This allows me to just remember him and just to never forget to keep working hard. All right, so there's my story. Hopefully you waited long enough to hear the entire thing. So thanks for checking out my brand new Reeb SST. I'll leave a link to those articles and websites in the description below. Hopefully you found the video informative. Hopefully you found it fun. Until next time, get out there and be a boss.